Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Poland Daily History. Today we are at the Warsaw Citadel, a structure built by the Russians in the 1830s and later on used as a prison for political dissidents and fighters of the January uprising of 1863 to 1864. Some of the prisoners held here would later on become prominent figures in Polish politics, while others were executed or sent to Siberia after imprisonment. Today, we will talk to some of the experts about the specifics of the Citadel, the January Uprising, and more history about the era. Our first guest is Michał Cieślak, junior custodian at the Museum of the 10th Pavilion in the Warsaw Citadel. The January Uprising would later on have significant ramifications all across Europe. And I was wondering if you can tell me what are the influence of the January Uprising to countries such as Austria, Russia, and Prussia.
Bez wątpienia największy odzew na powstanie styczniowe był w Austrii.
Without doubt, the biggest political response to the January Uprising was from Austria. Austria was seen as one of the harshest partitioners up until the 1863 January Uprising, treating the Poles very badly. Austria's influence during the so-called Galician slaughter of 1846 should be mentioned. Austrian officers incited, or even according to some legends, paid Polish peasants for bringing back the heads of noblemen. And this nation, so hard on its Polish citizens, changes its view on Poles after 1863. It sees that the January Uprising, this great power, even though eventually defeated, has united Poles, and so they decided it would be safer to allow Poles to have some authority, and in 1867 a dual Austro-Hungarian monarchy is proclaimed, with Hungary being declared their own kingdom with a high degree of autonomy, but Poles also gain a much higher degree of autonomy than before. They have rights to Polish schooling, they have rights to the Polish University in Lwów, the Polish press is free, Polish culture is free, and until the eruption of the First World War in 1914, Galicia becomes a sanctuary for Polish fighters, particularly from the Russian partition. When one needed to rest or felt the need for a change, then the Austrian partition of Poland was the place to go to, as it was very safe terrain. As far as Germany goes, the unification of Germany in 1871 was in some way also dictated by the January Uprising defeat. The Germans were well aware of the fact that they had a lot of Poles on their territory. They were politically unpredictable, rebellious, they could cause the Prussian authorities some problems. So when Germany's unification occurred, the Kulturkampf, the culture battle, and the battle for unification was mostly directed against the Poles. The entire system of mass deportation of Poles from the Prussian partition to that of Russia or Austria, the intolerant schooling system, the attempt to turn Poles into Germans, was related to the January Uprising defeat. When it comes to Russia, in Russia there were few changes. Russia continued as a monolith, as an empire. They felt victorious. They knew they were the masters of their own destiny once again. Unfortunately, the political situation for all the conquered nations was worse, not just for the Poles, because Tsar Alexander III, who in his first period of rule was unusually liberal, trying to continue the politics of Alexander II, having seen how the January Uprising ended and realizing that the Poles could repeat something like this and try another patriotic breakaway, patriotic for Poland, but dangerous from the Russian point of view, returned to a gendarme of Europe style of politics, a politics initiated by his grandfather Nicholas I.
Żandarm Europy powrócił do polityki zapoczątkowanej jeszcze przez swojego dziada Mikołaja I.
And what about France? Did it have any effects on France too?
The French were not very willing to come to the aid of the uprising out of political reasons. They believed that they will benefit more from cooperating with Russia. This line of thought was firmly held by Napoleon III. On a side note, I can tell an interesting story. When Julius Verne wrote his famous book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the main character, meaning Captain Nemo, was initially supposed to be a veteran of the January Uprising. Verne's idea was however blocked by his publisher, who argued that such a background story would be received with great animosity in Russia, and that will certainly create a diplomatic conflict between France and Russia, as well as leading to none of Verne's books being sold on the Russian market. This is why Captain Nemo in the end was given the background of an Indian Raja and not a veteran of January Uprising.
Historical events as major as the January Uprising were not without significant impact. The three partitioning powers in Poland at the time would see a shift in internal politics as a reminiscence of the event. Historian Dr. Krzysztof Jabłonka will give us a little bit of insight to the lasting impact that the January Uprising would have on the partitioners. The outbreak of the January Uprising happened in Russian territory of the partition as we know it, and I was wondering if you can elaborate on what effect it has on the three-way partition that was going on at the time. What are the internal politics like, and how did the specific event of the January Uprising impacted the partitions?
Każde z zaborców zareagowało inaczej.
Each of the partitioning powers reacted differently. It should be said that the Polish uprising, as the Russians called it, made a dent in the internal affairs of Russia. At the time, there was political turmoil with people debating as to how far will the reforms go. A great country of the Tsar, which spanned from the Stula River all the way to the Kamchatka Peninsula, was going through essential changes. The more revolutionary of the society believed that the Tsar will finally give its people a parliament, that Russia would become a parliamentary monarchy similar to the one in Britain.
Monarchia parlamentarna przypominająca przynajmniej monarchię brytyjską. Niestety nic z tego się...
Unfortunately, none of this ended up happening. Until this day, some Russians are blaming Poles for it. They said, had you not done that uprising, we would have had a parliament 50 years sooner. Prussians made a different choice. They decided to take advantage of Poland weakened by the uprising and force the process of Germanization, which meant taking away the Poles' right to speak Polish in public. They were ordered to only speak German, and if they said any sentence in Polish, whether at school or at any office, they were given fines or were even arrested. For example, parents of children that would not want to learn their prayers in German were sent to jail. Austria reacted completely differently. They were shocked by the strength the Poles showed in the uprising, so they decided to support Poles by giving them complete freedom to organize their own authorities, and gave the Polish society a very big autonomy in the form of Galicia and Lodomeria, stretching from Krakow all the way to Moldova. It was in this area that in the forthcoming 50 years the Polish culture blossomed. We can mention the University of Lwów. This was a completely Polish school. The Jagiellonian University also had its revival at that moment. Some community universities were also established, and with it came the establishment of the peasant movement and full parliamentarism. Galicia, the part of Poland under the partition of Austria, became to Poles what Italians saw in Piedmont, the place where our battle for independence grew out of. And so, we did not manage to beat one of the partitioning powers, but we managed to drive a wedge between them all. In the end, Austria would join forces with Germany against Russia, while Poland would emerge victorious from that period as a fully independent state.
Ostatecznie Austria z Niemcami stanie przeciw Rosji, a my z tej walki w czasie już I wojny światowej skorzystamy, wychodząc na niepodległość.
The January Uprising was one of the most pivotal moments in the era when Poland was partitioned. The Poles would later on spend decades debating whether or not they had taken the correct path of resistance. During the interwar era, the veterans were treated as heroes, and they would later on serve as an inspiration for the soldiers fighting in the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. That's it for today. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.